everyone. We are here today with Valerie Milburn, co-host of the award-winning podcast Mental Health, Hope, and Recovery. Hi, Valerie. How are you?
Hi, Kelly. I'm well, thank you.
Good. Thank you for talking to me today. So tell me a little bit about how you started in your career.
Well, I actually started my very first media in high school journalism newspaper. I graduated from the University of Texas with a journalism degree, and my first job was a one-person communication department for a nonprofit public policy think tank. Then I spent a year as director of Buy Greater Austin for the Chamber of Commerce, and that was my bridge into advertising. And I spent 4 years at an ad agency, and I was successful there, and that is where I had my mental health crisis. It took me 5 years to get back into the swing of things, but during that 5 years, I became a high school teacher, and I started teaching journalism, photojournalism, and English. So I got back into the journalism world, and I started really getting into photojournalism at that point.
And how long were you in a teaching position?
7 years of teaching and 6 years of running a social emotional learning program. And I retired after just 13 years in education. And that was an entirely new journey in retirement.
And so it sounds like though you didn't actually retire because now you had another project that you started after that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I had this opportunity just come to me. I have a friend, Helen Sneed, who is now my co-host of my podcast, Mental Health, Hope, and Recovery. And that came about because Helen and I met as a volunteer for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And Helen has a friend from her years in New York who was starting a podcast hosting platform. And she came to Helen and said, I would love for you to do a podcast about mental health. Helen said, I won't do it without my friend Valerie, and our podcast, Mental Health, Hope, and Recovery, was launched.
That's great. So can you tell me a little bit about your volunteer work with the National Alliance on Mental Illness?
Well, it started out as being a part of their annual walk, and I got to know that's their fundraising project for the year, and I got to know the executive director, and she asked me if I would run a special event for them. That was my intro, and then she and I got to know each other. She asked me if I would start as a trainer for their peer-to-peer program, and then if I would become a speaker for their Inner Own Voice, which is where you tell your story, and that is where I really just came into an entirely new acceptance of my mental health condition. I live in recovery with bipolar disorder, and telling my story to people just really made me realize that there is a value to my struggles, because I was able to share my struggles with others and realize that my experience does give people hope and recovery, and didn't realize that later that would become the name of my podcast.
That's interesting because I was going to say, do you feel like that part of your volunteer work with them is what guided you towards building out your podcast the way that it's designed now in that storytelling aspect?
Absolutely. Helen and I both have a line in our story. We learned that our dark past is indeed a value that can actually be a shining light of hope to others who are struggling.
That's great. That's great. All right, so I spoke with one of your podcast listeners, who's a friend of mine, and I asked him if there was anything that, if he could ask you one question, what would it be? He actually gave me 3.
Oh.
So I'm going to ask you all 3 if you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right, so the first question was, why are we here?
Why are we here? I really believe we are here to be of service to our fellow man.
And how would you say that aligns with the way that you live your life today?
Well, I think the key there is today, because I have gotten to this point of being of service, actually through the 12-step program, where I learned how to get out of myself and realize that I do have something to offer by being of service. And I read a line every morning, meditation and prayer, that says, relieve me of the bondage of self so that I may better do thy will. And I realize that my higher power's will for me is to take these experiences that I've been through and try to help others recover their best lives with whatever guidance I can give by sharing my own experience.
And so how long do you have Silver at this point?
25 years.
25 years.
25 years. I had 25 years last October.
That's incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you.
In that 25 years, can you tell me how the way that you live your life and how that aligns with what you feel your purpose of being here is? Can you tell me how that's changed over time throughout your recovery?
Well, it's changed dramatically since prior to recovery. An example is, I knew from the beginning that of being a mother that I needed to be a good mother, and I was a good mother from the beginning. My sponsor told me that at my worst level of drinking, I was a better mother than many are not drinking, which was an amazing thing because I worried about that. But I never really thought about being, of service in the area of really being a good daughter, a good sister. I never really realized that I needed to contribute 100% of myself into my marriage, which is now 41 years old. I've been married for 41 years.
Wow.
And I grew in the ability to commit to that relationship and give to that relationship, and then to give to a wider scope of service through volunteering, through sponsorship, through giving to the community in other ways. Just walking across the street to my 91-year-old neighbor with whatever she needs, to check on her when it's freezing outside, or whatever it is I can do that would never have occurred to me prior to getting sober and learning that I do have a role to contribute to the world in general, that I have something of value to offer.
So speaking of values, that's something we talk a lot about in recovery, is identifying what our values are and making our life choices and operating ourselves around what we value to be. What would you say is the biggest value that informs all of your life's decisions today?
To continue to try to be better at what I hope to achieve. I fail miserably on occasions, but I know that if I keep working and keep trying to grow, I will expand what I can offer others. My values are family first, God, family, sobriety. I have not just this marriage, but I have 2 grown children. I have 5 grandchildren. I have a life of just fullness and being blessed, and I want to show up. My value is to show up, because I didn't show up for a long time.
Well, and being someone who personally knows you, I can speak to how full your life is, and it is incredibly impressive and inspiring to me often at how you do continue to show up. It really pushes me a lot personally in being able to show up for the things that I need to do when I see how busy you are, and you always show up, you're always there.
Thank you.
It's incredible. All right, so let's talk about your podcast.
Okay.
What's it about?
Well, again, it's called Mental Health, Hope, and Recovery, and Helen and I offer our experiences in recovery. We share at a very deep level, very openly, very honestly, about our intense struggles. Helen and I both have had a long battle with our multiple diagnoses of our mental health conditions. We bring on guests to share their experiences. We have had numerous therapists. We've had other people who live in recovery and share their struggles. What we want to do is be of service to our listeners. We have a worldwide audience, which just has absolutely floored both Helen and me, that we have reached people in Bangladesh. We've reached people in Australia and everywhere. It's you name a country, and we have listeners. And Helen and I think about, we have people listening in war-torn countries and people living in Fiji, on the beach, and where it astonishes us, the people who are listening, to the hope that we offer and the tools that we offer and the wide variety of perspectives that we offer. And we're just so grateful that we get to do this.
Yeah, I think talking about the reach that you have is actually, it's really important when you think about, the access to recovery resources here in the United States and in much of Western Europe is pretty high, especially in cities like Austin. There's thousands of meetings every week. But that's pretty incredible to think about using media as a way to transmit this message to places in the world where it maybe wouldn't have existed before. Was that something that you guys thought about when you started, of just wanting to reach as many people as you could, or it just kind of organically was a natural benefit?
No, our goal was always to reach as many people as we could, but we had no idea that we would reach people all around the world. That it never occurred to us that we would have an audience like that. Helen had never listened to a podcast. I mean, it just fell in our laps, and we just are so grateful for, like I said, so grateful for the opportunity. And we have people whom we know that listen and tell us directly, how it impacts them, and then we get letters, emails through our website of people who have been touched by it. And no, we never realized the impact that the podcast would make.
So you mentioned getting letters from listeners. Do you have one that you can recall that was maybe the most touching that you received from someone?
Probably from the podcast on self-injury, which is a very difficult subject to talk about, and we took it on. And we had someone who wrote in about that she appreciated the way we talked about it so openly, and that she had not really heard someone share so directly and so personally and with such respectful honesty, I think was the term she used.
That's incredible. You talked about having guests on your show. Can you tell me about one of your favorite guests that you've had? Or most challenging guests? Either one of those would be.
I don't think we've had any challenging guests. Dr. Steven Strakowski came on board, came on the podcast. He is one of the premier researchers in the area of bipolar disorder. I got to know him when I worked with him on the redesign of the Austin State Hospital. And I asked him if he would be on the podcast, and he said yes. In fact, nobody we asked has said no, which also astonishes us. And he was amazing. And so he talked about the research and the treatment that is happening in the area of bipolar disorder. Anders Osborne, he's a New Orleans musician, and he came on the podcast. He is in recovery from both substance use disorder and a couple of different mental health conditions. And he shared his journey, his story, and he was amazing. So I loved Anders Osborne.
That's awesome. All right, now we know the ones to check out for
Yeah.
sure. So I am personally a listener of your podcast as well. My favorite episode to date was about animals and the value that they have in emotional wellness. I tend to steer away from the more difficult topics myself. So I'd like to know from you, what was your most challenging episode that you've worked on to date, and why?
The most challenging episode was the one where my husband and my sister came on to talk about the spouse and the sibling perspective for a series we were doing on the family dynamics of a psychiatric crisis. And they shared their journey with me during my psychiatric crisis, which obviously was my entire family's crisis. And they shared things that my husband actually had never talked about, and listening was hard, but he did it with such love and respect for both me and for mental illness in general. My sister also shared a couple of things that I didn't know about. They also shared how much they had supported each other, and they showed such love for each other and such love for our children, because they both, really dug in and took care of the kids while I was basically absent, either physically or emotionally absent.
Wow, that is tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool to think that you got some benefit from your own work as well.
Oh, Helen and I get a lot of benefit from our own work.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, so you and your co-host Helen, you've won 3 awards.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me which one you're most proud of and why?
Well, two together, because the 2 together really tell us that we are achieving our mission. One is called the Positive Change Award. The other would be our Listener's Choice Award, which was one of the Signal Awards we won. The Signal Awards recognize the highest level of achievement in the podcast industry. And so the Listener's Choice Award is voted on by our listeners, and the Positive Change Award is just exactly what it says. So it shows that we are making a positive change with our listeners, and it's exactly what we want to do.
And you've only had this podcast for how many years now?
We have completed 4 years. We're in our 5th year. We have put out 51 episodes.
That's incredible. Those are really huge accolades to receive in what would still in some ways be considered a relatively new show.
Mm-hmm.
5 years is big, but that's pretty young for someone, especially coming in with no experience in this realm. It's incredible.
Particularly since we only do it once a month, and it's only 51 episodes. Once a month is infrequent for a podcast, but we take care of our own mental health, and therefore we only put out one a month.
All right, so what advice would you give to others who are wanting to start their own media projects?
Follow your passion. Take care of yourself in the process, because it can be overwhelming. Basically, do what you love.
So where can listeners find access to your show? I know you have a website. You can be found on Spotify. Is there anything else I'm missing?
Well, we're on all major platforms, but the best way to find us is through our website. I mean, you can go to Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Pandora, but we are at mentalhealthhopeandrecovery.com. And if you go to our website, you can learn about me, you can learn about Helen, you can learn about how we started, you can find all of our episodes. So mentalhealthhopeandrecovery.com.
And so what is going to be the next episode, and when is it going to be released?
Well, the most recent episode came out yesterday, and it's the 4th of 5 episodes in that series I just talked about. The 5 episodes on the family dynamics of the psychiatric crisis, and it's a really good series.
Awesome. All right. Everybody check it out.